The floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. Let me share my here. And all right. All right. Well, this is, I want this to be conversational. So I'm going to do my best to, it's early morning here for me on the West Coast of the US. So I'll pause quite a bit in between my slides here. And feel free to just ask questions and poke at me. This is meant to be, whoops, sorry. Let me get my slide deck back up. This is actually, I'll start off. This is a report that I worked on with the European Commission that I shared with David that I'm sure he'll share out with you guys, and it'll cover a lot of what I'm talking about here. All right, there we are. So I'm going to talk today about how you guys can drive the economy with Earth APIs and kind of just cover, I'm going to cover a certain basis about what is API, and then I want to technical details of how to do it. But I really want to drive a conversation with y'all and get questions from you about, what would speak the most to y'all. It sounds like someone's stirring their coffee, not on mute. Um, and and hear from you guys about what's needed. And then I proposed to David that, we could do a follow-up session if you guys wanted around, once some of this sinks in and you had some time to think about it. But let's start with a quick introduction. So who am I? What do I do? My name is Ken Lane. I'm Chief Evangelist at Postman. And I don't know what keeps happening to my screen here. One second. There it goes. Oh, it's just the full presentation mode I keep stumbling over. So anyways, my name's Ken Lane. I'm Chief Evangelist at Postman, but Postman is a API client, but also most recently a full lifecycle API development platform. But I have a blog called API Evangelist, where I've spent the last decade exclusively studying the API lifecycle. I started in 2010 coming out of SAP and just kind of seeing what was happening in 2010 with mobile phones in the cloud. And I wanted to understand this a little bit more. And a decade later, I'm still doing it. I just recently joined Postman. I felt like I have a PhD in APIs now, and I need to actually apply that now. I've been working with enterprise organizations over the last decade. I worked for the Obama administration, 2013, doing the open data work after he made his mandate that all federal agencies needed to go machine readable by default. I went around to the different federal agencies explaining to them what JSON was and what XML is, what machine readable by default meant. And then I've continued that work through the recent administration, working with Health and Human Services and Center for Medicaid and Medicare. I work with the GSA on various projects. And then I've come over to Europe, and I worked in 2017 with the European Commission on that report that I showed you briefly, and just really trying to help people understand what APIs are all about. And I don't look like my cartoon anymore because COVID haircut days are a little bit different. So let's start by demystifying APIs and what they are. This is always a difficult part because, I want to back up and explain what an API is, and I apologize if some of you are more technical and you know what an API is, but I also feel pretty strongly that folks who know what an API is should always kind of get a refresher because there's a lot of nuance to APIs and simplicity that I think technical folks don't always think about. So APIs, or application programming interfaces, really are just the next iteration of the web. They aren't any new vendor solution. If they're wrapped as a vendor solution and being sold something, I would run the other direction. It is just HTTP and now HTTP 2 and 3. But it is just really building on what we've been building on for the last 25 years. So at its basics, a website is getting a lot of background noise. All right, there we go. A website is just meant for humans to be viewed through a browser. So when in this example URL here, when you call products, you get a listing of products that is returned in HTML so that it can be rendered in a browser. All an API is doing is stripping away that visual aspect of it that's meant to be interpreted by a browser and making it machine readable. Historically, that's been XML. More recently, that's JSON. But that purpose of that returning of that data is to display those resources in a variety of endpoints. So it could also be used to generate websites and web applications. But really what brought APIs or web APIs to the forefront was the mobile phone and being able to show resources on small mobile applications that were accessed via networks that were constrained, so cellular networks. And JSON was preferred over XML because of that characteristic. And then shortly, around 2009, once we started delivering all of these digital resources to our mobile phones, a lot of developers really realized that you could do this with other devices. So we started seeing thermostats, we saw Nest, we saw security cameras, and basically, 10 years later, every device that you could imagine is being connected to the internet. So I have a camera here kind of showing that, but really that endless nature of the Internet of Things, it's all API driven. It's all about sending and receiving data, sensor data, weather data, water data, anything that you can gather with a device, with a sensor. You can transmit and use APIs to gather that information. And so really, all of this over the years, excuse me, is how companies are defining their digital resources. And in 2006, a company called Mashery came out with what's called API management. But from 2005 to 2010, several other companies emerged, 3Scale, Apogee, and by 2010, companies were requiring developers, before you could access these APIs, you had to register, sign up for a key, and get into a plan so that you can access a certain amount of these resources. And these companies provided ways that people could do this. A lot of people call it service composition. So you could say, hey, these partners can access my products API, and they get this high level limit. These third-party developers or public developers get this lower level of access, and it's rate limited, and they can only access X amount. And we saw this around 2009, a whole new crop of API providers emerged that were doing this. You see Type, SendGrid, there's a whole bunch of these platforms that were built based upon APIs that emerged that were using API management to basically take these digital resources, define them as new products in different tiers, and then sell access to that in a pay-as-you-go basis. And you see the fingerprint of this on SaaS with the different plans: free, pro, enterprise. Those SaaS plans are very much reflect those API-driven resources behind those SaaS platforms. And you can really see this at scale with Amazon. Is when in 2006, Amazon, launched Amazon S3. A few months later, they launched Amazon EC2. All that is two separate individual API resources, and they were just APIs to begin with. There was no interface for Amazon. And then they put an API management layer in front of it, and they're charging you per megabyte storage, and they're charging you per compute hour of that server. And so it is just APIs, two separate APIs with an API management layer that set into the motion the entire cloud that we're familiar with. And you look at the whole spectrum of services that Amazon offers now, it's pretty substantial. So really there's two fundamental cornerstones that I would recommend you study and think about is just simple API usage coupled with API management. Now API management now is baked into the cloud. All of those companies that I talked about there was consolidation occurred around 2014. They were acquired. Intel acquired Mashery, and actually then Tibco acquired it again. Google acquired Apogee, and Red Hat acquired ThreeScale. You can find API management is a fundamental ingredient in all of the cloud platforms. So Amazon, Azure, and Google all offer API management as a fundamental capability on their cloud platforms now. So all of this in around 1995, 2000, when this all first began, it was really about e-commerce, because that was where our imagination was. That's what our heads could see. It was about making data and content available via the web so that it could be used in affiliate programs, in reseller programs, and Salesforce, Amazon, eBay, they were the kind of pioneers of web APIs. And 20 years later, they're still kind of changing and shifting things. I'm working with all three of those providers to define their API programs. And then around 2003, 4, you saw a kind of social aspect of this emerge. You saw Flickr take their images and make it available for blogging platforms, which kind of fueled the whole Web 2.0 blogging world. And then you saw Twitter. Twitter, when it launched, it was just basically you could sign up, you could create an account, and you could follow friends. And then just a couple months later, they launched an API, and everything we know about Twitter today was built through the API ecosystem and the developer community. All the mobile apps, all of a lot of the web properties, the widgets, the buttons, much of it was developed as part of the developer community. And really, this showed the importance of social in all of this. So that social evolution was an important part. It wasn't just about making money; it was about building connections, sharing data and content. And then, as I mentioned, with Amazon kind of reinventing themselves, Amazon internalized APIs in a way that they were doing as part of their affiliate and reseller programs. And then in 2006, they launched Amazon Web Services, which was basically, Bezos's mandate internally that everybody should do APIs internally. And if you're going to be working internally between departments, you should be sharing those data resources and then now infrastructure as an API. And that was the birth of the cloud. And then right at that same point, we got the iPhone, we got the Android. And that's when I saw the potential. It was about 2008, 2009. I was running Google events. I ran Google I/O the first time they gave away the Android phone. And I really saw this combination that things were picking up, that you could deliver resources to mobile applications and you could deliver global infrastructure using APIs. So what was happening here. A decade later, every major platform application that we're using out there, everything is using APIs. Every web application, mobile, desktop, device, our cars, signage, everything is using APIs to transmit data and define those resources. And really, this is the important part of it, and I'm showing on purpose kind of commercial data entities that I don't necessarily agree with when it comes to data, but I feel like these are the counterbalances to what y'all are doing, and what you want to do is all of these digital resources across all of these platforms are being defined as web APIs, as being defined with an API management in different packages and being bought and sold. And so, people, human beings are being digitally defined, categorized, their demographics put into different packages, and then sold out the back door of these developer portals that have emerged behind all of these platforms. And some of this is in aggregate across platforms. Sometimes it's gone through 3 or 4 different brokers, but APIs are how they're being made available. And those products and pricing and packages are all API management. And so whatever the digital asset or resource is being defined, it's being sold via APIs. So it's a little bit about, it's a pretty superficial look at what APIs are. I'm biased, but they're everywhere. So to me, they've been critical for about a decade. Most organizations I go to, I don't have to explain what an API is. I still do that because it's important for us to kind of keep talking and rehashing what they are. But I do have to kind of reinforce why they're so critical. I can say they're beneath everything that we're doing, but it helps to kind of walk through, the scope of this. And so I talked about Amazon. This is a listing of Amazon Web Services. There's over 100 individual services, but then a couple thousand individual APIs within those services. Everything Amazon does is an API first and foremost. That is a mandate that when they launch a new service, and they launch a dizzying amount of services, I'm actually trying to keep up this week with the new ones. They're all APIs first. Every one of them is an API. Amazon defines its platforms as APIs. And Amazon has actually gotten very predatory about that because they define everything as APIs. And because they have API management on their platform as a service, encouraging people to define all of their digital capabilities as resources. This is how Amazon is poaching and building the next generation of services, by convincing all of us to build APIs on their platform.
So
and
Ken,
yeah.
Sorry, Ken, let me just jump in there. It's a very relevant question. One of the issues we've been talking about is how do we actually deliver environmental performance data of products and services into Amazon? So if we have sort of information about a product life cycle or carbon footprint or environmental footprint, how would we actually begin to influence Amazon to take that information into account as it provides its product listing? And what I'm hearing from you is if that was our ambition, the only way to do that for Amazon would be via API. Is that correct?
Yeah, and via Amazon. It's a very theater production. I'm courting them right now as a partner for Postman, and they know everything about you. They know what you spend. They know, and they know whether any of the resources you have are a concern. And so if you want to get their attention, do it via APIs and do it via their platform.
Thanks, Ken. And we had one other question. You mentioned the difference between XML and JSON, and Stephen Ramaj was wondering, or he out that many geospatial standards moved from XML to JSON. Do you know if there's a reason for that, and are there other standards that we should be aware of, especially for geospatial data in the API landscape?
Yeah, this was a serious question for quite a while. I know NEAMS, are the standards bodies in the U.S. federal government, has made this switch. I've been on a few of those calls and governing boards. It took them a long time to come around, and really, it's market pressures, and why people do web APIs is because web APIs make sense to a wide audience, where XML and service-oriented architecture was still a very developer class of services, and JSON is more lightweight. It's easier to understand. It's spoken. It's a vocabulary that's understood by a wider audience. I would say the only thing that's rivaling it right now, pushing it, is YAML, which again has a lot of haters. A lot of the JSON people who love JSON hate YAML, but it is so XML, JSON, and YAML are kind of the three flavors that you'll see out there. If you're doing Kubernetes, if you're doing a lot of infrastructure, YAML is a favorite. But really, JSON is still kind of king when it comes to the request and the response of modern APIs. So you're pretty solid there. I know that NEAMS is currently converting all their XML into JSON. Even though there's a loss, XML is superior to what you can define with JSON. There's going to be a loss somewhat, but I guess they're reconciling with that trade-off right now, because of market pressures. Because if you want developers, if you want to be able to hire developers and them to use it, of the younger generation, XML is not always the easiest, and people are resistant to that. JSON is widely known and accepted. Because of these market forces. One of the reasons the NEAMS folks told me that they started considering and thinking differently is when I forget when it was. It was a few years back when there was a missile notice in Hawaii, I believe, of North Korea sending a missile, and it was a false alarm. And when they turned it off, they couldn't. The announcement had gone out throughout all the systems, and everyone was warning of this. But then when they figured it was a false alarm, they reversed that. But not all the systems spoke XML. It had gone out to some systems that translated it to JSON and then redistributed it even further, and they couldn't call those back because they didn't have that translation in the system. So they needed JSON capabilities as well as XML capabilities, and that was one of the kind of come to Jesus moments where they had to start thinking about, hey, there's a lot of these consumer apps, there's a lot of these municipalities that depend on kind of consumer level business apps, and they're speaking JSON. So we have to think about that.
Great, thanks very much.
Yeah. So really the scope of this is pretty crazy when you think about it, and the performance. If you guys are going to think about how to do the performance of this, and get business paying attention to you, Amazon is one of those you can emulate from an API perspective, like how you do your APIs, how you present yourself, how you develop. Amazon, I study how they do it. I mean, everything from how they issue patent notices, like how they file for patents is quite a signal about what they're doing coming down the road. And so Amazon is very full of these signals. Azure is very similar in that, Google. So when you're looking at how to court business with APIs, studying the API pioneers is a great way to do it. Study Salesforce. This is what I've been doing for the last decade, is looking at how these providers do what they do and signal what they signal. And the vocabulary is APIs, requests and responses, and then increasingly real-time APIs, TCP, Kafka, things like that. But simple still king and will be for a long time, speaking JSON, because it speaks to that wide audience. So you'll hear the phrase REST a lot when you hear about APIs. And so REST, or representational state transfer, was developed around 2000. It was a dissertation from Roy Fielding, who proposed how to use HTTP and basically the web, build on what's already out there, but use it to describe your digital resources. And this is what I talked about all the companies have been doing. They're not all doing it perfectly. The Restafarians and the believers out there would tell you it's not true REST, but it's a resource-oriented way of looking at your digital assets. So it's a way of defining things as individual little resources that have interdependencies and relationships. There's ways to articulate and express that, but this is how enterprise organizations are defining all of that data that they have. They define it as RESTful resources. Now, what these resources are in REST, I probably shouldn't use that word, when they're in the database, they may look very differently than when they surface and they're shared with partners, they're shared with developers, and they're used in applications. And so REST or web APIs are a way of expressing that. It's how you say, hey, I'm going to expose this weather data or this payment data, and I'm going to expose it to you in a way that you can consume. So web APIs are how you use existing infrastructure, and then an easy, simple way for how you describe those resources and make them available so it speaks to a wide audience. REST, or most of us in the space just call them web APIs, speak to a wide audience. They're intuitive, they're easy to use. There's a reason why the Twitter API blew up like it did, is because it was simple. It just had plain language words that people could understand. This is a comment, this is an email, this is a photo, and I can access that. Now I'll talk a little bit more about this in the future, but these resources aren't just about getting, they're about reading and writing. So posting and updating these resources. So usually for each one of these resources, you can get it, you can actually update it as well. And in some cases, you can delete it. And so defining your whole organization, all of your digital assets as resources is how, and then layering on API management is how organizations are making the money that they're making. It's increasingly how you define your digital capability. What is possible? These are the actions that you can take on these digital resources. This is how I talked about how you can deploy infrastructure. This is how you take actions with those infrastructures. And HTTP gives you a handful of verbs. You'll see me use these fairly regularly, and they're pretty critical. Is get is the most fundamental, verb on the internet. But you get a post, a put, a delete, and then there's a bunch of other verbs. And then API designers have pushed other ways of using verbs and describing actions that you can take with APIs and making it so that you can orchestrate really easily with a whole suite of digital capabilities. And this is the number one thing that I speak to enterprise organizations about doing, is defining their digital resources and their digital capabilities. Every enterprise organization I talk to is scrambling and struggling to do this right now. In the last 5 years, no one knows what all their digital capabilities are. No one knows where all their digital resources are. I'm talking like the IRS in the US. I did a full day seminar with them. They cannot find all of their digital assets and resources. It's usually due to politics. It's not because it can't be found. It's because of digital hoarding, data hoarding amongst groups. I go into banks. I go into insurance providers. Every enterprise organization I go into is struggling with this right now. And this is the number one initiative, is trying to define their digital capabilities and make them discoverable so that they can be used on a regular basis and without friction.
Can I have another question? Just jump in there if that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, within UNEP, we have this sort of two-step process. First, we need to federate our digital assets internally. Do they speak to each other? And then we need to offer those out, to the world, as you say, as a combination of resources and capabilities. But is that right? That basically the first step is to federate your internal ecosystem first and sort out your internal house first, and then make it available, or can you do both simultaneously?
You can do both simultaneously. It depends on the type of data and resources, but what you just spoke of is pretty common. There was a huge push 2010 to 2015 that, hey, everyone should have a public API, when a lot of people realize, oh, we really don't have our act together to go public. There's a lot of performance and repercussions that can happen by going public too soon. And so getting kind of your legs under you internally, following Amazon's lead on that is always a healthy, sensible thing if you're nervous, if you're unsure about what you're doing. But usually the approach is you do it internally, you do it amongst partners, and then you do it wider publicly once you have your legs under you. So again, I'm trying to speak to my audience and rile you guys a little bit, but this is the truth. This is why all of these digital resources and capabilities matter, is not just so that these organizations can be more efficient in doing what they do. It's so that they can quickly extract, and put to use all the other digital resources that are out there. It took me, I'm pretty embarrassed to say, it took me about 5 years to really understand the extent of this. I was pretty much the face of APIs for 2010 to 2015, saying, do it, they're good, everybody should do it. And I went with Tim O'Reilly and to the U.S. government and got the U.S. government to open up data, and I got municipalities to do it, and everyone open up your data as API and resources. It took me until about 2013, 14 to really understand the extent that I was just basically opening up mining operations for large enterprise organizations to come in. And, when you hear disruption, it's like, that's what's going on, is mining, is extracting of resources. And I was the forefront of that, going out, getting all this done, and these and access this. And this is, this is Google, I would say, is one of the strongest examples of this is with Google Maps. Google Maps is really built on public data, and municipalities opening up their transit data, their busing data. If you ever talk to the any of the transit folks who publish the feed that Google depends on, they hate Google. They do not like Google because they're demanding, they ask for stuff, and they give nothing in return. And so getting folks, this is why I spend a lot of time educating about API management is there's a reason these large companies use API management. It's to protect their resources and manage they want to make it available. Here, make it available, do something with it, build the next killer app on Uber, build the next killer app on Amazon or Microsoft. But they're so far ahead of the game that you just became a new mining target for information. That's how Amazon builds its data, is by you building on Amazon. And so you have to have API management in place. If you're publishing resources, you have to make it available, because Google has mastered the extraction of these resources and not giving anything back to these municipalities. And so Uber, Google, all of these heavy data companies. I mean, Facebook's a little different because they built their own beast, but Google, a lot of Google is built on extraction. But every company I've worked for, even Postman, is really data centric and data oriented, and all of this is generated by APIs. And depending on the company's business model, they're going to approach it a little differently. They're going to be much more exploitive or less exploitive, but it's all about mining data and finding the insights and finding the value, defining the value that exists within this new set of resources that we're extracting. And usually these resources are being extracted from us as individuals personally, our small businesses, and our municipalities and government. And so API management is how the value of these resources are being defined in motion as they're being extracted, but then again as they're being made available for sale to the highest bidder.
Ken, I got another question. I'm going to jump in there. I mean, you're raising a fundamental point. Within UNEP right now, we have partnerships with Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, where each of them is providing different cloud services for a certain kind of environmental analytic. But typically, it's a global environmental data platform or analysis of some kind or another. What's your advice? I mean, first of all, does that alarm you that we are partnering with them and giving them this kind of environmental data? And second of all, what would be your advice to prevent them from kind of that wide scale mining and extraction of insights from that data? Is there anything we can do to prevent that, or is that just the name of the game now?
It's the nature of the beast. You're going to have to dance with them. That's I dance with them. I know all these folks, and there's plenty of great people at all these companies. I don't want to disparage them unnecessarily, but they do have a business to run, and they will be extracting. They can't look at your data, like if you have it on Amazon or Azure, use those resources they're making available, but they're using it to size you up. They can't get at your exact data and take your data, but they can use it to understand the scope, the scale, understand who you interact with, all of those kind of edge access things. They have the analytics and insight into that. So you're gonna have to play with them. There's no avoiding it, but you're gonna have to have your kind of way of identifying who your friends and who your enemies are, and who's actually helping you, and all of that. And I mean, the VCs right now, if you're a startup and you're taking venture capital from VCs right now, there's a concept of the cloud kill zone. Like, they will, if your product is not very defensible and you're running at 100% on Amazon, you will not get funding right now. You have to show how you're thinking multi-cloud, you're operating in multiple clouds, how you're running in your own data center, and how you're basically defending yourself against this. You got to at least show you're aware that you're dancing with these devils. So you got to do it. I would say just really healthy practices for how you define your digital resources, how you define your capabilities, how you lock up with API management is pretty critical. And when I say, I get a lot of pushback when it comes to public resources and saying lock it up with API management, because especially in the US, folks say, this is, public dollars are paying for this, we should have access to it. But that's the front line of these extractive entrepreneurs. And those people don't realize it, just like I didn't realize it for 5 years, that I was the front line of opening up these new resource pools. And so though you have to have a plan for dealing with those people, because they're going to be picketing at your front gate saying this data should be open and free. You shouldn't be locking it up. But that locking it up and measuring it and understanding who your partners are, who the third party, who public consumers are, that intelligence and data and actionability at the API management layer is going to be your biggest asset. And everything should go through API management, even your internal and APIs. I can't stress this enough. You should be measuring value of every bit of resource as it's going out the door, even if it's going to another group internally.
Just one second. We've got one more question coming in from Brennan Van Dyke. Do you want to take the floor, Brennan, and ask your question?
Sure. Thanks so much. So, and I apologize in advance because this is probably going to be, it may even be an absolutely stupid question, but a simplistic one, because I don't know this field very well. But and I'm probably one of these people who are pushing back about public data. But if you look at what UNEP is trying to do, right, we're not trying to make money. We're trying to make a clean environment globally, if you will, if that's a good way of putting it. So for us, a successful venture is one that gets more entities, government entities in particular, but civil society, academics, scientists, gets them more environmental data. And so there's two sides to my question is, what is the downside? Why I'm not quite following why I care about whether Amazon is mining that data and using it for, purposes of making money however they can. That's what the private sector does. Does it somehow interfere with or over time have the potential to impede my ability to get the right kind of environmental data out to the right players? Excuse me. And then if you're thinking from a business perspective, if you want to call us a business, where maximizing revenue isn't the goal, but maximizing a flow of information is, does it change the way that you would be talking to us? They're related questions, I think.
Those are brilliant. Those are brilliant questions, Brennan, and fantastic. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, no, those are great, and it gets at, I would say, the essence of how I view API management is API management for commercial entities is about monetization, generating revenue, but it's also become about just defining value and value exchange. And API management, when it comes to government agencies and nonprofits and institutions, that's more my concern, is just identifying there's value exchange here that's occurring here. And a lot of times value exchange that you don't quite understand as it's going out the door. And I've had these conversations with US Census Bureau, our Department of Interior. Those are the two strongest precedents I have in this. Both of them said the same thing, where we're not in this to make money. We're in this to enable people to do more, to build more. So we can't actually block this and lock these things up and get in the way. And that would be a bad thing. And over the years, I've eroded that belief, because the U.S. Census was able to actually achieve their mission more by having APIs and being able to identify who the partners are. And they're not quite monetizing it yet and charging Google for access, but they were able to find new users who they couldn't see as part of the downloads and the larger. But I would say the biggest challenge that you face, and it doesn't matter if Google is taking these, don't underestimate the vacuum and the tractor beam of the Google Death Star. If one thing you can see, it's slightly adjacent to your guys' world, but you can see this in election data right now. In leading up to the US election, if you go anywhere looking for election data via an API or download, everything pointed to Google Civic data. You go to Google Civic data, this is where you do it, because 2015-16, Google went to the FEC, went to all these sources, gathered all of the data that you would need to understand the 2016 election. I think, and they started at 2013 for the previous Obama run. They went out and they got MIT, all the institutions, they got all the news outlets. Everybody uses Google Civic data to do this. So they basically switched the polarities. You didn't go to the FEC. You didn't go to all these sources to get your data. You came to Google Civic data. And guess what? In the 2020 election, all these roads still pointed there, but Google did nothing. Google did not publish any data. They didn't provide any insights. They did nothing. So thus, there's this huge vacuum. No one had access to any data to make sense of what was going on. And this is by design. This is by design. And they can do this over and over and over in different sectors. So think of what Shell can do, what Chevron can do, what these entities can do when it comes to dominating the conversation around this. Because they have access to your data, they can take your data, they can take it from many different sources. They can make it available directly or indirectly through a proxy and control the conversation. And then at certain times, they can make that conversation go away or be silent or be misinformation or not accurate. So really, there's a lot of different ways that they compete with not just commercially. They're going to compete in many other ways. And so being able to secure your digital resources, and API management is about striking that balance. It's, yes, everyone's got to sign up and get a key, but hey, if you're a researcher and you have a relationship with us, we're gonna give you all the data you need. We just need you to pass that key with it every call you make, so we know it's you, and then you can have everything you need, no friction. But we will still send you an invoice or a report saying, hey, here's what you've used from us, because we want to understand our relationship. We're not going to charge you for that data. We're not going to guilt you, but we're gonna quantify the value exchange that's occurred between one of our projects and this institution or this commercial entity. And so it's really yeah, go ahead.
Can I do, is that okay, David, if I do a follow-up? I don't want to monopolize.
Yeah, go ahead. Just let me jump in before that, though. But I think the other point that Kim's trying to make as well is that for our donor world, we need to be able to show, if they've provided us $20 million for a particular project, who's using the data and what value is being extracted from that data. The way we currently set things up, we can't answer that question at all. All we can show is downloads, which is almost nothing. So this allows us to show the actual value, who are the users, and to really quantify the value of that product. And as Kim said, I think the other really thing that scares me is that Google could eventually decide it wants to become, Google for the environment and become the source of all environmental data and kind of leave us in the dust. And so we need to make sure that also doesn't happen through API management. Kim, go ahead.
So that was half of my follow-up, that second point. And then the first half of my follow-up was that, are you saying, Kim, also that by having this knowledge, when we have a relationship with Google, we will potentially at least feel less like we are beneficiaries and more like we are at a somewhat equal footing and understand better the trade-offs from their perspective and what they're getting out of the relationship, as opposed to thinking that they've just given us all sorts of wonderful assets and assistance.
Precisely. I mean, Google, all of us tech solutionists want you to believe that we're doing good for you. You should be thankful that you're doing business with Google and Microsoft, and we should. I mean, they have a lot of resources, but yes, API management is about us having the upper hand and at least being able to intelligently sit at the table and go, here's what's being exchanged, and not being in the dark about that.
Is that super expensive for an organization like ours, though?
API management?
Yes.
No, I mean it's a commodity in the cloud now. It's a fundamental, it's a basic resource. I mean, API management is an API resource now. So it's just, pennies on millions of API calls. So it's not, I would say the biggest cost is going to be education across UNEP, making sure everyone's aware how to do APIs, aware that how do you set up API management, make sure everyone's gated and has an API management, how you interpret the reports, how you invoice and quantify that value exchange. So yeah, there's going to be administrative costs on that. But in my mind, I mean, it's just like David said. Like look at Google right now. They're making a move into healthcare again, and they've done that before and they abandoned it. But they're doing it again right now because of regulatory positioning around digital healthcare interoperability right now, and they're wanting to own the conversation. And so I guarantee at the right moment they're going to do this with the environment data. And may not be for the long game. They'll probably give it up in 5 or 6 years. They'll have several starts and stops in that, but they'll do it to control the conversation and kind of disrupt what's going on. And if you guys can maintain the upper hand even at those added costs.
What do they get out of disrupting it?
Because so it's like WeWork right now. You know what WeWork is, the office sharing. So
yes.
WeWork takes funding right now and is at such a low cost of operating that there's all of these local and regional co-working spaces that are being driven out of business right now because they can't compete with WeWork. WeWork is insanely cheap to get shared office space. And so investors just funnel money into these things to crush markets, to disrupt markets, because when all those parts and pieces are left laying on the floor in the end, they come in and sweep them all up, and then they dominate and they're the player. So pick your industry, they're doing this right now, and they do that, they do that through acquisitions. That's a big part of it, but they also do it with APIs and figuring out where all the resources are and understanding the best places to have co-working spaces and stuff like that. So when it comes to environment data and risk, I mean, that's going to be the number, it's not just, the environment's the most important. Like environmental data from a risk management standpoint is going to be one of the most critical things. Like which neighborhoods do you want to do business in? What cities, what countries, where are supply chains? All of this is going to be so critical. And if they're able to disrupt any of that and be able to maintain any of that value for themselves, everyone else is going to be scrambling on the floor trying to piece together all the pieces while they have the lion's share of the insights and awareness.
Kin, while we have this break, I'm sorry for interrupting again, but while we're having this kind of exchange, we had 2 more questions coming from the floor. I wanted to ask if Yashwen could take the microphone, and then after her, if Rob could take the mic. Please, Yashwen, go ahead.
Thank you, David. Thanks, King. So my question indeed, I think halfway has been answered earlier. Can you actually suggest some principles or bottom lines in our collaborations with big players in order to serve the mission of UNEP? I understand you have answered the question by digging into for example, quantifying the data has been involved in the process, and then exercise some administrative level control. But on the other hand, there are also issues that UNEP in its mission have to deal with. For example, provide the necessary level of transparency. And in this regard, for example, what kind of principal bottom lines that you would suggest that we set in our collaboration with digital players in terms of the general performance of a product as developed using UNEP data? What I sense, just a quick context, is what I sense is the API approach deals with machine information, and as a result, human beings get screened the data. does it actually allow for more like transparency or actually controlled conversation? For nowadays, we actually get less information just on Google search because we need to jump into Twitter in order to see whether an article published by a journal has been publicly debated there. And then you don't really get any more like this connection between different platforms easily. It is only machines can fetch the information in that way, but not any more human beings. So this is the context of my question. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, great question. So API management provides, and use the word transparency. I think it's a great way. So how transparent you are with the API management layer is one of the policies I would recommend that you guys establish. That and you have to negotiate this with each of the partners and each of the providers, is part of you accessing our data through API management. Part of the plan is you have to allow us to share that we have a relationship with you, and this is something you see playing out with, GitHub not sharing that they do business with ICE, the immigration in the US. And so these relationships are enacted through the API management layer. These are users or accounts. How transparent you are with that data. You'll see some API providers are very transparent with this. They have an integrations page that lists all of their top providers that are integrated. Some of you even show the scope of that relationship, how much data or how many keys or tokens or volume. And so API management, one of the fundamental things why I encourage you to do it is it provides awareness of consumption of your resources and the value exchange, but it provides you with reports that you can use to understand and report up to your bosses what's going on. You can report to your partners. You can give those dashboards to your consumers and say, here's what's being consumed. But then you can publish that data publicly as well, or a subset or a part of it. And you'll see this as part of what's called an observability movement in the space. Now, most observability conversations you'll find in the tech space are about monitoring uptime, service level agreements, making sure that, hey, if I'm providing you with this resource, that I'm meeting my SLA. But there's a lot of people around that who are about observability being about the next generation of transparency. Basically, it's like, hey, API management has this data. Let's surface and report on these relationships and be more transparent about who's accessing data, how much, who are the biggest consumers of Facebook's API? We don't know. Who are the biggest consumers of Twitter's API? We don't know. And if that API management data was made available in some sort of transparent way, think of what could happen in the elections with researchers. Like university researchers would love to be able to look at that data and go, hey, look, all the top users are bots. Here's how the elections are influenced. But Twitter doesn't provide transparency or any insight into that data. So it's up to you guys to set up your own policies for how transparent you are with this data. There's a wealth of insight in that API management layer if done well, and it's up to you guys to be transparent with that.
Thanks, Kin. Rob Price had a very related question, so I'll give Rob the floor as well.
Thanks, David. It was just going back to the kind of conversation around affordability. So I agree. My background is global payments, transactional businesses. I've been in the loop of national initiatives to aggregate anonymized payment data and make that available through APIs, or indeed application of banking through PSD2. So I agree with your point. At a transactional level, it's negligible in terms of cost. But I've also seen organizations suffer from massive take-up and use and calls to those APIs that therefore through volume mean that there is a greater cost that's incurred, and they need to do something with that. So I guess my question is, have you seen that there always does need to be a commercial model that does demand either upfront investment? The program that I mentioned in terms of payment information, for example, is a multi-million-pound investment to set that up, or is there a different way of doing that does actually kind of find a solution for not-for-profit organisations?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an overhead here, but I would say there's several layers. So API management is about keying up these resources and securing these resources, which is one layer dimension of the conversation. Is people publicly just can't get at this, and so you can't be hit with the denial of service attack. But one common way of draining companies is what's called a cache overflow. And I'm not talking cash like HTTP cache. I'm talking cash like money. Is they will just slow drip your APIs and then run up your Amazon bill. And so there's many of these tactics, and so you have to have a security layer that will filter out unnecessary calls. But when it comes to your API management, yeah, there's definitely an overhead with being able to do this, but you've got that awareness that's generated at the API management level. That's another resource that you should be quantifying the value of. And to speak to the payments industry, there's a reason why Stripe, which is for everyone else, is one of the top payment providers. Why they have a venture arm where they make investments in other startups, because of the data at their API management level. They know who's making payments from where, for which startups, for which sectors. They have all of this awareness. So they thus have a venture arm that invests in that. That speaks to that value generation, that indirect value generation at the API management level. It's not just, hey, there's API management value for these payments. There's this other meta layer of value being generated at that level. And so this is a real concern, like the technical latency, the administrative costs of doing this. There's definitely all of those problems there, but there's also an entirely new value generation and awareness. And I would say the number one reason or benefit of doing API management is the reporting and the analysis and the awareness that's generated at this layer. I mean, all the way to, the U.S. Commerce. Until they keyed up. So in the U.S., the GSA launched their own API management solution to meet this need. It's called API Umbrella. You can find it. It's an open source API management solution that they wanted to develop to make more efficient. So it's open source. It's quick. It's performant. So it wouldn't have a heavy overhead for people. And then government agencies can feel comfortable adopting it because it's made by government agencies. And then once agencies started doing it, they realized we're being consumed by all our other agencies. Like, they had no idea who was doing things. And then it created that feedback loop with those consumers, and then they created conversations that strengthened partnerships, and entirely new projects were born out of those relationships. So yeah, there's cost, there's administration, there's latency, there's a lot of issues there, but what can be built on that is greater than that sum of those parts.
Thanks, Ken. I'm going to hold on further questions. If you want to continue with your presentation, that'd be great.
Yeah, it might start diving into some of this, because that's kind of my next, is the number one reason that you do this is the feedback loop. And Census Bureau is one of the greatest, the best stories I have in this is, the Census wouldn't do an API when I first started talking to them. 2011, they started doing their APIs because they didn't want to impose any bias on the surveys, and they felt that API design and locking it up would be perceived as bias on this. And then once they did, they realized that all the people who were consuming their surveys were the people who had the resources to download a big file, crunch it, and make sense of it. So it was large institutions, large organizations. And once they launched an API and launched some spreadsheet connectors, they lit up a whole new market, or not market, but group of people who were trying to make sense. They just wanted this one slice of the survey. They didn't want the whole survey. And so these were often people going to those commercial solutions to get that data. Now they could go straight to the source. And then this opened up the feedback loop with Census. So because those people are coming, grabbing a spreadsheet connector, signing up for an API key, Census knows who these people are. they have their email addresses, and they provide a Slack channel. They provide other mechanisms for people to ask questions and provide feedback as part of that API management layer. That's a fundamental aspect of API management. And the value that comes from that feedback loop far exceeds anything else. It's one of those benefits of doing API management that is just huge. I mean, they're still quantifying the value of being able to talk to these consumers and iterate upon the next generation of the surveys with them. And so the feedback loop that's initiated by just requiring people to key up and build a relationship. Most entrepreneurs and developers just get out of my way, just give me the data and don't bother me. That's common, but that's not the norm. You should be able to build a relationship, provider-consumer relationship, initiate a feedback loop, iterate on the design of the API, on the design of the data, what's there. You should be able to contribute back. And so I'll talk a little bit about how, I'll kind of fly through this section. And I like the questions even more than me talking. So I want to get back to some of your questions. But what can you guys do to build this ecosystem? And I would say, define all of the domains. You guys know the environmental domains. Be the source. Be where people go to find that information. But this takes a long time to build this up. I mean, even just explaining to my wife, who I was talking to this morning, I didn't understand, we didn't fully grasp the scope of your guys' mission, that you guys are out there, what you're doing. I would say there's a lot of people in various, private sector functions that don't understand that you guys are the source of this high quality information. Like, become that domain owner. Standardize on the APIs, because people will emulate you. So I'm not going to go through all these standards, but OpenAPI is a standard for describing the surface area of your APIs. And this is, you mentioned PSD2 in the banking industry. There's an OpenAPI for the PSD2 banking in Europe as well as UK. OpenAPI is how you describe the surface area of each API, what's possible. And PSD2 is a way of standardizing this so that, if you go to every bank in the UK and you want to get a list of branch locations, they all use the exact same API design. So you don't have to change that interface if you're switching from Barclays or to HSBC. So be that for air data. Create the standardized API design for air or weather or water or any of the environmental domains. Define and standardize what the APIs are in those industries. Async API is just the sister spec to OpenAPI. It's how you describe TCP, Kafka, HTTP2, HTTP3 APIs. And JSON schema is how you describe the objects or the models of the data being passed back and forth. And so if you guys standardize environmental APIs for every one of these domains, there's no reason there should be 150 different special Snowflake, weather sensor data APIs. There should be 1 or 2 or 3 competing standards, and you guys should be one of those standards. And so own the domain, define the schema and the object model that's in use, define, and provide these open source definitions of what each resource and capability is. Map this entire landscape with OpenAPI and JSON schema, and then people will emulate that, and you will see interoperability. You will see people emulating you because you guys are the leader in the space, and that interoperability and standardization around APIs will make it all easier. But all roads will point back to you guys and supporting your mission, but it won't be all roads pointing back to you in how commercial providers do this, because Amazon doesn't standardize their APIs. They just dominate, and everyone emulates that because they dominate. You guys will dominate through standardization and sharing and being open with the design of your APIs.
Ken, I'm going to come in here with another question. I'm sorry, it's very pertinent. This is one of the key questions that we're having right now, is that each of the big cloud providers will probably set a de facto standard for its environmental APIs, right? And
Yep.
and the question is, should we be brokering a dialogue between all of them to say, okay, guys, let's figure out a common set of environmental API standards? Should we be doing that conversation with them, together with them, or should we be, trying to do it ourselves and then, almost imposing this international standard on them? Do you have a sense of how best to take that forward in order to take forward this vision you're offering us?
Yeah, do both, because they're going to want to play with you, but then they're going to want to slow you down by playing with you. So you have to be doing it on the side on your own and leading. It's the common. So I'm actually dealing with this in the Open API right now. So Open API became a massive standard. It's huge. It's in the Linux Foundation. We put it in the Linux Foundation. But the two top API providers, SmartBear and MuleSoft, both came in and they're leaders on the board, and they've slowed things down. They just basically, things only get decided and move as fast as they decide that they should move. And so where that board changes now after 4 years is we're getting that changed here this month or in the next quarter. And we're moving forward the conversation. So that's the top level. But for each industry, I'm doing airlines right now. I'm doing healthcare with fire specification in the US, doing PSD2. Each of these industries or domains can suffer from the same illness. So whoever the top players are in these space, they're going to want to play with you. Yes, of course, we want interoperability. Yes, of course, we want this common standard. And then they're going to slow you to a crawl, and they're going to throw resources at it, teams, people who will come in and argue, and nothing will get done. And that's by design. So you have to be doing it. You have to be demonstrating it. You have to be making it on your own but you have to play both sides of that coin, unfortunately.
Great, thanks. I'm going to hold a couple of more questions. I'll let you continue. We've got another kind of 50-minute schedule, but if you have some extra time, Ken, we'd love to continue. So do you have extra time but beyond the 4:30 end?
Yeah, I have. Let me see here. What time is it? I don't even know what time it is. Yeah, I have about an hour and a half left, 2 hours. So I'm good. But okay. Yeah, let me just kind of roll through some of these, and then let's open it up for conversation, and we can dive into each of these. That would be great. Because I think some of this is going to kind of give you guys context and help you guys see some of the bigger picture. So standardizing the domains is going to be super critical. You guys want to be the source of not just the data, but the structure of the data and the access to the structure of that data. And so really defining, this is the top for all industries. Airline right now, excuse me, the airline industry is just scrambling to define these standards using Open API because they got to reinvent themselves right now. Talk about disruption. Excuse me. So every industry is trying to do this. Healthcare, banking, those are the two strongest precedents we have. But defining the domain and making it interoperable is of a huge concern right now. All right, let me get there we are. So all of this, I talked a little bit about the different verbs. Really it comes down to get, post, put, and delete. This is what's called CRUD in the developer circle. So it's create, read, update, delete. These are for each resource. This is pretty standard. When you launch a new image API, it's got create, read, update, delete, or get, post, put, delete. These are the HTTP verbs that make a resource so you can transform, not just get it, but you can transform it. And when you stand API management in front of this, what you get is you see who your consumers are and you see who your contributors are. You can quickly see who gives you data, who helps you refine and update that data, and then who is just taking. So your API management reports on each of these dimensions for each user, for each application. And so that is a rich set of reports that show who's just taking data. And you can see really quickly your API management will sort the people who are just getting and then getting at such a scale that they're just sucking every data point from your system. It's the equivalent of a download. You'll see who those people are, and you can rate limit, you can put those people into a plan, and you can charge them accordingly. But when it comes to who's creating and who's updating, those are the richest people that you want to find. And these are trusted people. You can give them just a little bit of access to create new things and put data in, or you can give them a lot if they're trusted. And you quickly identify through API management. This is that granular level of value creation, is you see who your givers and takers are, and you can reward that. And because API management has that monetization layer, I can charge per request or per download or per bit for all the getters. And then I can reward, I can actually pay people for posting data. And then there's also reseller layers in there. If someone wants to upload all of their data and be a partner of yours and put all of your data into, your Earth API's platform, and then you guys are selling access to that you could share revenues with them. They're a creator. They're someone who's giving. And so the API management combined with the verbs is how you understand who's an abuser, who's a giver, and who's a taker, and you reward accordingly. But really, I can't articulate enough. This is easy to dismiss by technical people, but there's a reason why web APIs have blown up like they're, because they reach a wide audience. There's simple vocabulary, resources, actions that you can take, and how you simplify that and make that easy. I know environmental data is a big mess. Depending on if it's coming from different sources, it's not standardized. It can be confusing. It can be, the relationships between the data can be just really tough to navigate. So simplifying API design, standardizing across all groups, all divisions, all partners, all projects, having a standardized model, having them described as open API and JSON schema, making it so it's well defined. A lot of work goes into that. You're working with your industry partners, your institutions and government agencies to define those standards, but keep them simple. Don't keep, it's the biggest problem that the FHIR specification for healthcare in the US suffers from right now, is it's not simple. And so adoption is really slow. So I can't articulate this enough, how important simplifying things are. And then I'll throw out there evangelizing, as again, this is me pre-COVID with a beard and a hat. But evangelizing and domain evangelization is going to be one of the most important things you guys can do. Getting people out there talking about what APIs are available, engaging with those consumers, showing up for meetups, doing virtual gatherings now in a COVID world, having conversations with your consumers, going out and knowing who your competitors are, knowing all the sources of weather data, know all the providers, get to know them, understand them, and reach out to them. So really all of this, how do you influence the economy? Kind of just gloss over this rather than going down in too much detail is, most public data sets I come across are just a byproduct of some other project, something. It's like, hey, the project was a mobile app. The project was this data gathering. The making it available as data is just an afterthought. It wasn't the primary goal. If it was the primary goal, it's probably a commercially driven effort. And so more government organizations are starting to see APIs as being the primary need, and a handful of institutions, but really it's not really, public data set and understanding what it costs to build the data set, make it available, and then evolve it. That's just not something that most organizations, most are at, hey, here's the data, we're hands off. But that continued value generation, that continued revenue generation, so we're making a profit, so that we can better meet our mission and invest in the next iteration of this data set, the next iteration of the API, the next iteration of the partnerships and consumer relationships. That's what I'm talking about when I'm saying revenue generation. That API management layer should invest in the future of that API. It should provide so that it's sustainable. This resource is sustainable and will live on. And that mindset just doesn't exist in very many data circles. Most people are still very data download oriented. They don't know about APIs and API management. So where are the opportunities? Service composition, building different packages of environmental data and services for different providers, offering premium sources of data, charging for consumption, paying for contributions, opening up revenue share opportunities to your partners, not so they can get rich and make money, but so they can sustain themselves. They can maintain the lion's share of the value of their data so that they can sustain their organization, sustain their mission, and not just give that value away and not benefit from the relationships with those consumers. Be the domain experts, summarizing what I said, standardize the API designs, the schema designs, be the comprehensive source of where people find, be where, be this always source. All roads should lead to you guys. I can get into other details about how when people build applications, web, mobile, charts, graphs, Excel spreadsheets, how you can make sure that they attribute, so the provenance of the data behind their applications is always known. That's a way of helping acknowledge that this is where it came from. This came from the UN. This is a source. There's a reason that little brand or icon exists on a lot of data applications that are using data, because of that you want to be known as the source. This is where you go. We're ubiquitous. When anyone's viewing a chart, they see in the corner that this came from the UN, and you can click on that and you can land on your portal and see your resources. There's ways that you make sure you're the ubiquitous source of information. You're the domain experts, and then that's reflected across all of your partner channels. And people know that, it's the Intel inside. Intel, no one cared about Intel, as a company, but every one of their partners, every one of their PC makers put Intel inside on the box, on the thing, and everyone knew it. That's what you guys have to be when it comes to environmental data. And then lastly, what you guys can do inside, and this sounds superficial, but when it's done right, it's meaningful. Be API first by default. Don't think about the charts, the graphs, the visualization, the app, the mobile app, web app. Think about the API first, and then bring all those stakeholders together that are doing the charts, doing the partner integration, system to system, all of that, and then build the best API you can to meet all of those needs. But be API first. Every API has a specification, is part of a standard, and then is moved forward as part of a common API lifecycle. Study up and have API governance practices. This is what I do for a living with all of these enterprise organizations that I showcased. I help them standardize their API lifecycle and govern that API lifecycle, so the APIs that come out the other end all look, behave, act the same, follow the same specifications, even if they're made by different groups and different teams. And this takes training, education, and coming into agreement on what that API lifecycle is and what governance looks like. And then again, the number one tool in your toolbox is telling stories around all of this process and evangelizing within a domain and cross domain, and making sure that you guys are the experts in what you're doing. And with that said, I can go back and we can dive into any piece, but I would love to hear those extra questions.
Awesome, Ken. Thanks so much. That was brilliant. Exactly what we needed to hear. I just wanted to do sort of a virtual round of applause, first of all, to thank you very much. So here's your virtual applause.
Thank you.
And then we have a number of questions coming up, and I'm going to get to you, Kit, in a minute, but I'm going to first, I think Yasin had a question. Yes, Yasin, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Thanks, David. I think, Ken, definitely excellent presentation, and in many ways, it's gotten the mental juices flowing. Early on in the Obama administration, there was this push to democratize data and get the data out there as much as possible, so that the public sector could create useful apps for government data that would help citizens. Is there any public sector entities that have done this very well? that you can give us an example of and that we can kind of somewhat emulate or do have a case study on? Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I can point you to a couple. I would like to do kind of a retrospective on that because I was part of that movement. That's definitely where I learned a lot. I would say the agencies off the top of my head, Census Bureau, definitely talked to them. They've learned a lot. They've stayed true to their mission. They have APIs. They've continued building relationships. So you can, the U.S. Census Bureau, they have a Slack that you can get involved in and have conversations with them. And so they've had a lot of learnings around it. I wouldn't say they've all been positive. That's part of the learning process is the negatives. I would say the General Services Administration in the U.S., GSA, which is kind of the central IT group. So they go around. They have the 18F, which is modeled after the UK kind of geek squad. 18F is out of GSA, and they go help other agencies with their APIs. And so, and I can provide David with a list of these links, but I should actually probably write a story that kind of summarizes a lot of these. So 18F goes around to all of the agencies and helps them with their goals. Another one is USDS. Is the U.S. Digital Services. This is out of the executive branch. Much like 18F, they go to different agencies and help do what they do. But these are actually kind of shows the competition within the U.S. I would say the best example is Blue Button, the CMS Blue Button. I've worked with them on. So this is Center for Medicaid and Medicare, which is I think 60% of our healthcare market. So yeah, 60 million Medicare beneficiaries. This is how you get access to that information. And so they have quite a robust set of processes. I help them define their whole onboarding process because they have to, they can't just give anyone access to these resources. So they have a sandbox. They have a kind of proving process of how developers prove themselves in the sandbox before they can get access to production resources. So I can let me do a kind of walk through everything because we're kind of regrouping right now for obvious reasons. We got a leadership change. We'll just leave it at that. And so it's kind of a fresh time for me to go through and go, hey, what did we do during the Obama administration? What survived the last 4 years? And what momentum can we find right here out of the gate? So I'm probably overdue with this roundup, and let me do it similar to you'll get a feel for how I do my storytelling. I'll round this up or write this roundup on the blog and publish it as I do all of my stories. So this is a story I wrote coming into this talk to kind of load everything into my head. I'll do a follow-up on what are the best examples of government agencies and success stories I've seen out there, and then share it with David. He can get it out to y'all.
That sounds great, Kin. Let me push it over to first Pooja, and then Kit can take the floor. Pooja.
Thank you, David, and this has been really, really insightful, Kin. Thank you very much. I have two questions very quickly. You spoke about the Twitter model, right? Where most of Twitter has been built by the developer community. Now, looking at that, creative model, let's say, what are the ownership parameters for these creators that may be using, let's say in this case, our API? Is there any leeway, and does this API management plan that you talk about help define that?
Oh yeah, most definitely. So Twitter is I feel the most important API out there. It is the API that I love and I hate. And their journey provides a lot of these lessons. So they opened up, they benefited from this kind of free and open, really light touch API management, meaning everyone come sign up, millions of developers, build. And then by 2010 to 2012, they took on so much investment that they had to start controlling that. So they started tightening the screws on the API management layer. And you can see this, I think Twitter quadrant. Let's see if this still comes up anything. But the Twitter API quadrant was them in 2012. See if it's still here. Yeah, so August 2012, outlining their tightening of the screws at the API management layer. So everybody's got to authenticate now. We're not giving away any data for free, where they had a slight public layer. We're screwing down the rate limits now. We don't give away to, there used to be partners that just had endless access. Now that ended. Here's the changes, and they laid out a quadrant of where they wanted you to exist, and if you didn't exist, so in certain quadrants, they cut off your access. And so Twitter really provides a living example of how this API management works at scale. And so they're actually reverse course on all of this now. Is if you look at their recent blogs, and I actually should do a kind of post-mortem on this. This would make for a great white paper, because in the last year, and I'm actually working with their team on this, they've added monetization. You never could pay for Twitter data before. You could become a partner and give them money at a scale and get large access, but it wasn't, back to the original question of transparency at the API management layer. It wasn't standardized and it wasn't transparent. You just had to go through the back door of Twitter, give them a bunch of money, and you could get preferred access. I'm sure they still do that, but they're at least now, offering. See if there's any latest tweet posts on this, but how they make the data available, and they charge for it now. So they're sharing the whole story and process of it, and you can actually pay and get heightened levels of access now, pay for premium access, get things. So really, as an API management story, Twitter is a great one to kind of go through. And like I said, I'll try to do a roundup and share with David and kind of do how they've evolved over time, from free and open to tightened down to now it's the mature, we've come out of our teenage years. We have to actually make money, but we have to be more transparent because we don't want the community backlash and revolt that we saw in 2012.
Thanks, Ken. One question came up. I think there's a couple of questions from the European Commission. A couple of colleagues are on the call. The one question that I had on the Commission side, have you looked into this, the whole concept of the digital product passport that is being proposed as part of the EU Green Deal? And if so, can you kind of describe what's the API play with respect to the digital product passport? So that's my EU question. And I wanted to ask if other EC colleagues wanted to jump in and ask their particular question. You could just jump in and take the floor. That would be great.
So I will just say I do not know anything about the digital product passport, so I'm not going to be able to. But hit me with your questions, because I'm curious what it is.
That might be a call for me, David, actually, if that's okay. Yeah. Thanks, David. Thanks a lot, Kin, for the great presentation. Very insightful. Obviously, you did some work with the European Commission before, which is really great to see. So quite a high-level question, and perhaps you've not had a chance to look at some of the work that's been being done on this. But the Commission just published recently a Data Governance Act, which is a precursor to what you would call European data spaces. That's the ambition, is to create data spaces. So the goal is to address some of the issues that you described. And create sort of a more European sort of economy that's more autonomous, if you will. So I just wanted to understand more broadly if you know much about it, and what do you think of the kind of plan? So perhaps you don't know enough about it to give a view at the moment.
Yeah, no, unfortunately I don't. I went to Italy and worked with them on this framework for digital government, and then I've come back and took a job, and so I haven't really had my head in what's going on. So no, I don't know about the product passport or the governance stuff. So I'm going to have to get up to speed and get back to you guys on those.
No worries. Thanks, David. Anyway, thank you.
Benjamin, can you give just a quick overview of the digital product passport concept? Just for everybody on the call.
Yeah. Hi, this is Elias from Brussels. So I'm working on the product passport.
Thanks for this.
Go ahead, Elias.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the idea is kind of to transit to circular economy. So the sustainability of products, to try to get the information from the value chain, the materials that are in the products, where they come from, and where they end up, so that we actually can enable a secondary material reuse. Because, for example, in electronics or in plastics or in batteries, we waste a lot. So the idea is to actually to close the loop for the products and the materials. But that opens a lot of issues, like why would a third party, value chain providers of subcomponents and materials open up their databases of what they're doing, how they're doing things, how they extract and mine things. Then the manufacturers, why would they put all the data, how they put it through, innovative way to get the product together? Why would they open up their repairability manuals for repair cafes to open up on the line, to get the dismantling of the product or the spare parts? And finally, the recyclers that want to be in a closed loop with the manufacturers, which parts of the product they want back, why the product is hitting the end of life so soon or so late, so they can redesign the product for the manufacturers. So there are many, many different scopes for this product passport, starting with unique identifier across many different sectors, localizers and things like that. But at the end of the day, because it'll be distributed system, it's all about APIs of the economic actors along the value chain, because they will see that there is a value opening it up to manufacture to recycle, for example, because they have a value back, and vice versa. But I think the key, if I understood correctly, will be how do we manage these business relationships? And at the end, we come in as a government just to look at regulatory compliance with safety and other things around the products. And all of that will also be a great material for consumers. And product environmental footprint will be calculated, will be carried by the product passport. So there could be a lot of transparency towards the consumers. But it's so complex, and more we dig into it, more complex it gets. And I just realized that the APIs will be the key for the economic actors to manage, to monetize, and to keep the values, as you said, through these APIs. So I know this is too much for you, but I would welcome a separate conversation just for the European market.
Yeah, I think that's so critical, because you touch on so many companies are sitting on a wealth of data about their processes and how this works, and they don't realize the value in that if they make it open and available. But again, if they make it open and available for people to just take, there's not that feedback loop, there's not that value exchange and awareness. And so teaching API literacy and API management to just every company, I mean, this should be standard, is here's how you make your data and resources available. The problem is most companies see this as this is their secret sauce. This is how they do what they do. It gives them their competitive edge. So they're very nervous about sharing it. But if you show them they can make it accessible to the right actors, to the right partners, and then comply with governance, whether it's in the design of the API or the access levels, and there's a lot of value exchange that could be happen, especially when researchers get access to that to try to understand recycling. There's just so much benefits. I would love to dive in more and learn more, and then just kind of overlay the API management.
And it's very timely for us, because we will have a call. We put money on it, so we are something like a funding agency as well as regulators. And we put several million on testing this type of business-to-business sharing of data in the distributed kind of, we call it data spaces. That's a new term. I have put a link on the chat that goes to the new, just recently, a couple of weeks ago, adopted governance act, data governance act in Europe, where we try to promote opening of the public data, that because the public is not sure if it's really sensitive or not. So we're trying to kind of clarify what the public domain can open. but then they would, of course, need APIs to make sure that they also get value back. And we try to promote the private sector opening of data, and there again, the APIs is the story for them to monetize, to see why is it good for them. And we will have a big pilot, a multi-million euro projects for companies to open up and to see the extra value of sharing data. As I said, it can be in a closed circle between manufacturer, repairer, recycler, and the value chains of providers at start.
And that's so important, the sharing or teaching people, because this line between, and the questions we got around API management, well, we're not in the business to make money. We got to meet our mission. But then there's also these companies, they've got to make money. And so showing them the value of API management, that, yeah, you can generate revenue and there can be trust and provenance in these exchanges, and there can be revenue for your bottom line, that will open up a lot of conversations with folks. So yeah, I would love to dive in more, and I would love to, once I get up to speed on kind of what's going on, I would love to provide a custom version of this API management talk just for that market and that specific approach.
And the second work stream that I would like to take with David is the environmental data. So we have a lot of environmental data, and we need it for many, many purposes. And we are looking at, do we centralize it as we do with the European Environment Agency? Do we kind of distribute and make sure that everybody keeps their data, but we share them for, on mutually beneficial grounds? And how do we then use this data for product environmental footprinting? Because we need all that. And for zero pollution strategy, we have a chemical strategy. Everybody that is doing something in the environment looks up to us and my colleagues. How are we going to support them with the data management? And I think you just opened my eyes today with the APIs. This is the missing solution I was getting. How do we monetize? How do we get that feedback? Even to public sector, there is a feedback, like for the census you described. There's so much feedback that European Environment Agency or the ministries of, or agencies of the ministries of environment in different countries and the Commission can have by making smart use of the opening of this data.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I was able to open your eyes. I really look forward to these conversations with other domain experts in each area, because I've got the API and the API management expertise, but I don't always have these entire supply chain expertise to apply it. So and the oversight and governance, especially in the European Union. So I look forward to more conversations about that. Good stuff.
Thanks.
Thanks for that exchange. I wanted to hand it over to Kit. He has a couple of questions. Kit, do you want to try to summarize your questions for Kin? Thanks.
Yes, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. No, really appreciate this talk, Kin, and learning from your years, decades of experience. Two related questions. It's to do with sort of environmental data, and you sort of and that's like understanding, air, water, land resources, and you said that it could be often quite messy. So what other sort of sectors have you come across where there may be some analogies where we can learn from, where they're sort of dealing with sort of similar messy data? And then related to that, when you've been mainly talking about sort of HTTPS sort of web APIs, but my understanding is that often you need to version those. And what happens when when we're updating data sets, then we're having to sort of, provide another version of the API, and that might be quite different. For example, with sort of, GraphQL, my understanding there is they work quite differently, widely used in the front end design, but don't often have that same sort of updating, needing to refresh and say publish a new API.
Yeah. So let's start with the other industries question first. Yeah, there's quite a few examples I can iterate through several. I would say one that I'm heavily invested in is in municipal data, city data. I'm the tech lead on the 211 standard, which is how you find health and human services in a city in the U.S. 211 is a wider. We're trying to make it more international, but right now it's pretty heavily North America. The second is the 311 standard, which is how you can see Open 311 is a product of that. I'm not the tech lead on it, but I'm getting involved with them more. He's a friend of mine, and we're revamping those efforts. So that's a unified API standard and open API and JSON schema for how you report non-emergency events within municipalities. And so, Chicago, New York, I think most Amsterdam, I think most countries in the Netherlands are on this. And so once we get all the cities operating on that same standard, the interoperability and the reuse of applications across cities is becoming more evident in helping citizens find, health and human services, and then report upon, events that occur in the cities. And why that 311 data and health and human services data is so important is research. So it's not just, hey, how do we find a doctor or a food bank, or help deal with these trash in the street or the potholes in the city. How do you analyze that to understand class differences? The parts of the city that have the biggest problems with potholes and trash in the streets and issues usually are the most underfunded and the poorer parts of the town. And so same with health and human services. And then unfortunately during during the Trump administration with 211, we learned that 211 services can be used by people targeting mosques, targeting LGBTQ folks. And so we learned a lot of lessons around public data, with making this data available and freely access, and not having more provenance and understanding of who's consuming it because people are being targeted. And so that's just two layers of the city data. We got food inspection data. We've got, a whole stack of services that municipalities all offer and all try to use to manage their cities, but it's a mess. And it's one that is very controlled by commercial entities who don't want change and don't want interoperability. So for me, APIs are always the Venn diagram of three things. They're the technology of APIs, the business of APIs, which we just talked a lot about, but then the politics of APIs is always fascinating, and trying to actually, a lot of these companies, yes, we want interoperability. All the 211 providers, yes, of course we want interoperability. We're about helping humans find services. And then you realize when you sit with them, they don't want interoperability. They want all the data, they make money. And so I would say municipal data is one that's probably, there's a lot of lessons when it comes to environmental data, and there's a lot of overlaps and parallels. I mean, I think a lot of the data that's being surfaced at the city level probably is the data you guys are surfacing or looking for. So I would say that's one of the areas we can make the biggest impact. I've seen a lot of evolution in, and I'm working on a pilot right now to stand up API management in front of 311 data and offer a unified API across multiple cities, as well as historic data, so you can actually go back 10 years and look at the reports of issues, within a city. So I would say city. The second one, this provides me with a lot of my strongest analogies for generating revenue is the U.S. It is unique to the U.S. because we have our U.S. Department of Interior and we have our public lands. And then around all those public lands, you have a lot of commercial entities. You have hotels, you have tour operators, you have, car rental, bus, all of that. And so it's one that's been locked up by vendors for a lot of years, that trail data, that where the parks are, all of that. But the Department of Interior, and they've actually cited my work in justifying why they should monetize it. They published the Recreational Information Database, which is a massive database of all the public lands in the U.S. Normally, you have to go through a third-party private entity to get at it. They published it publicly. I convinced them to launch an API. And then now they're trying to build the case for an API management layer in there and using physical public lands resources as an analogy for digital public lands resources, in that the Grand Canyon is a public resource in the U.S. It's available for everyone to access. You have to, maybe pay a parking fee to park there. But as a citizen, you're entitled to go to this public land, and it's not being mined. It's not being extracted from. Now, if you're McDonald's and you want to open up a burger shop in the Grand Canyon, you've got to sign up and get your permits with the Department of Interior. You've got to pay your licenses and fees, but then you've also got to share revenue with the Department of Interior. And so, why are digital public resources any different than these physical public resources? And so, that provides, because that's an API, it provides a really good example, kind of a self-contained example of why charging for access for Google and others to this, if we're going to charge, Marriott hotels access to the recreational information database, we should charge, these big entities. But then if you're a hobbyist or a researcher, you should just have access to this data for free. You shouldn't have to pay unless you're using a lot of it. So I would say public lands in the North America, municipal city data are two important ones that I'm going to be using, and I recommend. They're messy, they're vendor dominated, but there's a lot of potential for making data open. I've got others, but those are kind of the top two that come off the top of my head. Versioning, that's a real serious problem. It's the number one. I'd say the number two question I get from folks going out. The number one is documentation. Documentation is generating and maintaining up-to-date documentation that's always fresh is the biggest challenge for folks. Versioning and managing change across that is the number two. And Open API is the key to this. This is how we're tackling this. I wouldn't say we've solved it, but if you maintain an Open API contract for each of your APIs, and that's your source of truth. And this is the one time you'll catch me here pitching my platform and my employer. This is what I do. This is what I feed at Postman is how do you manage an Open API contract across hundreds or thousands of API resources and then iterate and move those versions forward. Semantic versioning is how you do it. Each of your JSON schema objects is semantically versioned, and your Open API contracts are semantically versioned. If you add a parameter, if you add or remove or change anything, you reflect it in that contract, and your Open API becomes your contract with your consumers, and you treat it like it's a business contract. And then, so it's semantically versioned. If you do a major release, you break anything, you remove something, you change the name of something, that's a major change. If you don't, if you're just incrementing, adding something, enhancing something, better documenting it, or fixing something, that's a patch. You iterate that version and you update your contract and you put it out there. And then API providers like Postman and others use this contract to generate docs. Excuse me, that's the number one reason people are generating or using Open APIs to generate docs. The second is code generation. It's how you generate client-side code in all the programming languages. It's how you test your API surface area to make sure you're meeting your SLA. It's how you secure your API against OWASP. You can feed Open API into security scanners, and they'll scan all your surface of your endpoints. So that Open API contract is key to every stop along the API lifecycle that I talked about, that standardized API lifecycle that I recommend you guys adopt internally. It's how you deliver docs, mocks, tests, security scans, all of that. It's how you consistently communicate your API amongst stakeholders. It's how you iterate and manage change moving forward. Now that only gets you for your HTTP 1.1 APIs, as you mentioned. Now GraphQL is a valid solution to this. The challenge is you're not managing change or complexity with GraphQL. You're offloading it to your consumers. You're saying, hey, here's our crazy mess of a schema. You figure out what you want. You ask for what you want out of it. We're just going to be doing this. That works if you have a savvy group of developers building React apps and building mobile apps that know your schema or are brave enough to just navigate and find what they want. REST APIs or web APIs are a better way, a more thoughtful, intentful way of defining your resources and capabilities for people who may not know your schema or may not be savvy. So REST web APIs are a way of reaching a wider audience who may not be in the know And I highly recommend having a set of RESTful APIs right next to a GraphQL API, because then you could serve both groups. You can say, here's a buffet menu of resources, pick what you want. If you don't know anything about this resource, here's the docs, here you go. But if you want access to it all and you're just a database expert or you're building an app, here's a GraphQL endpoint to the same thing. And that's common. And then I would add in there, I showed briefly async API. So a lot of times some resources will be high volume, meaning the data's changing rapidly and people will be pulling that data. You will need webhooks. Don't pull us. When something changes, we'll send it to you. Or you'll need sustained connection. So you'll need Kafka, you'll need WebSockets. There's other types of APIs. And so there are multiple types of APIs for multiple purposes. REST or web APIs are the base, the cornerstone. GraphQL, WebSockets, HTTP 2 and 3, gRPC protocol buffers. Those are, yes, my brain is hurting. I'll stop there, David. So anyways, there's a whole spectrum. I can point you to more info on this, but versioning is a cornerstone of OpenAPI, and I recommend sticking there.
Thanks, Ken. No, my brain is hurting because it's been a fantastic discussion, and I know I can see we're approaching the 2 hour mark, and I do want to let you go, but I can't resist one other question, and there, if anybody else wants to put their hand up, please go ahead. But my question is really, if data is the new kind of oil, right? There are multiple environmental organizations that now have data sets, and I'm just wondering what incentive everybody has to start bringing them together into an Earth API ecosystem. I'm wondering if you could help me understand the value proposition of doing that, because it would seem like everybody can simply put their environmental data on an API and go at it alone. So is there like a value proposition in coming together and collaborating around this, or does it make more sense to go at it individually?
No, definitely. That's that givers and takers that I talked about and resellers is if I could bring my data to the UN platform and put it on and either A, generate revenue based upon some sort of agreement that it's now being made available to a wider audience that I, as a researcher at a specific institution, didn't have access to or even know about or think about. And you could actually generate a little bit of revenue to give me back for my research. I don't, we don't make much money, that would help in accordance with an agreement, not, hey, we're going to get you rich and you're going to make a lot of money. It's like, here's the value exchange and here's what we're going to do. That's one. So I'm posting. I'm a giver in the context of the Earth API platform. I'm not a taker. I'm going to give into this. Reward that. Get people want that they, some of the best APIs I come across out there are scientists, researchers. They're the best, highest value APIs. They're the least known about. They're the least accessed and consumed because they just don't put the SEO, the search engine optimization around it. They don't have the portal. They don't have the rich text. They're never found. And so if you could bring discoverability to those high value data sets and then generate revenue for them so that they can sustain themselves, that would be amazing. And then so the second part of that is if I could publish my data on there and then get X amount of credits in the API management layer, that I could then pull data out without it costing me to get access to wider research. So I'm giving in and I've got 1 million credits now. I can pull out 1 million credits worth of other data and other research. That turns my data into a currency. So I'm not making money from it, but I'm using it as credits to get access to something I maybe couldn't afford or even couldn't find and get access to because the UN is such a great aggregate resource in this way. And so I would say that again, that's that API management layer, providing an incentive model for how you guys can get more people to the table. And you could come up with different plans like that for researchers, different entities, and all the way to commercial entities, that if you can get me to the table with my commercial database, put it in there, and guarantee me that I'm going to make revenue from it. The provenance, I'm cited anytime that's shown anywhere, and then maybe enrich it and give it back to me, allow me to make it better for in my commercial product. There's commercial incentives there too. So it would just take, this is that service composition I talked about. It would take doing some pilots, creating some packages and plans, running those through different types of partners and stakeholders until you found the right balance and tone. But that's API management. You should be able to have 10, 15, 20. You don't just have to have, free, pro, and premium. You could have hundreds of different plans tailored for different relationships and people coming to the table.
Awesome, thank you, Ilias. I saw you came on for a second there.
I know it's already 5. I don't want to.
Oh no, we've got 2 more questions.
Longer, but
I've got another hour, so go ahead.
Oh, I see people dropping off, but I actually canceled all my meetings. I did supposed to disappear at 4, so Brussels time, whatever that means. I wanted to ask, we have a lot of mayors, so we have like 100 mayors that are promising. Sustainability for them is like a ticket to fame. Yeah. They want to do better than Paris Agreement, and they promising all kinds of things. But one of the things they really want to do is to get smart city solutions for transport, energy efficiency, at least of the public buildings, waste streams. So they do call in a lot of private sector to work with the data they actually own or they would like to get more of. And they have a problem because this space of localization and the street maps and all that is dominated by the big players. I don't need to tell you the name. So I would like to see if you know of any good best practice examples where local government got in good kind of collaboration with small SMEs doing something for their traffic lights, for the transport, as I said, energy, waste, whatever the local government is in charge of. It could be even health and care of elderly and things like that, where a lot of data is exchanged as well for telecare.
Unfortunately, most of the relationships I've seen are predatory and exploitative. And we won't, I'll name. So, like in Montreal, Google, smart city, a lot of the smart city movements are this grift, for lack of a better word, that going out, and it's the next generation of what Google did to build Google Maps. It's smart cities, and we're gonna do all of this for your neighborhoods, and but we're actually gonna get access to all this data. We're gonna be able to put in sensors, and we're gonna then get data from that. And so, you see a lot of pushback on these smart city movements because of this this kind of bad taste in people's mouth, and people are very skeptical of smart cities right now. I would say it's gotten a bad name in a lot of ways. If I was to find a few cities that have positive relationships, I'd have to assess more why. It's more in Southeast Asia. And where in Hong Kong, I see some open data that's really trying to do that public-private sector partnership in interesting ways. But I'm sure there's some illness there that I'm not seeing, and so I'm hesitant pointing a finger at something being positive without being more aware. So I don't have any good examples. But this gets at what I said about city and municipal data being a mess and being one of the important pieces, is because we're already moving into the smart city mode, and that next generation of exploitation is happening. And if we don't equip these mayors and their staff with this knowledge, they're just going to be rolled over again for another round, and we're probably going to hurt our chances doing APIs in the future because of this. There's so much backlash in the US from the last wave. So the API management layer, like we need a dose of API literacy and management literacy for mayors and their staff, but then we need to show them how to maintain the upper hand in these existing data resources. Like, hey, Google or IBM or these, if you're going to come in and play in the smart city projects, here's the service composition, here's the exchange of value. Oh, and then here's these new data sources that will be generated from the sensors, from all the things you're putting in there. And that shouldn't just go straight to you, IBM. We want that data. We own that data. That's our data. We'll give you a license back to it, but it's from your sensors. So we have to teach cities how to maintain a stronger upper hand in these conversations. And again, the API management layer is how they're going to do this, how they're going to broker it. And you can see this in, so I didn't touch on OAuth, but when there's, you know, three legs, when there's the provider and the consumer, as well as someone's personal data or business data, there's that OAuth access. And OAuth scopes are how these policy arrangements can be hammered out. For example, with solar in California, so if I install solar panels on your roof in California, I'm a third party vendor. I can get your consumer data from PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric in California. And that's done through an OAuth, through an API with an OAuth connection that me as the homeowner can authorize that vendor to get. But that policy is an OAuth policy that dictates what that vendor can get from PG&E and what PG&E has to give to that vendor. I went out from the White House and part of the Department of Energy to negotiate these policies. It was a week-long negotiation with Pacific Gas and Electric on the behalf of Department of Energy to negotiate OAuth policies about what data could be given, shouldn't be given, and it was clear PG&E owned that room. PG&E had the upper hand and literally said expletive, no, we're not giving you that. No, we're not, like repeatedly. So it was clear who had the power in that room. So that's just one example on the energy front. When it comes back to smart cities, we have to have the API management and OAuth policy frameworks in place. We have to educate all the mayors and the cities and the practitioners. Otherwise, they're never going to have the upper hand in these conversations, and they're going to be played again over and over and over by the industry until no one can ever do these things because, you know, it's just no one wants to anymore. So
that's for David, because we lost the game with the smart meters and energy that's owned by the energy companies. The next wave is the air quality, because we will put strategies and they will own this because it's city measurements mostly. So it's a next wave. If we can learn the lesson and kind of educate them how to manage the air quality and other type of environmental data would be great.
Yeah, and they're using it. It's back to that mining and extraction. Let's put in all these sensors in the city. It's great. It'll make everyone's life better. And then all the data goes to them, and then they make money off. You know, it's sad. We've just got to. Unfortunately, the public sector workers aren't aware of these, you know, and they don't see what they're giving away, the value they're giving away. And this is us, our citizens' data. This is our air data. This is our sensor data. So
they are often driven by the national kind of requirements to give them the figures. So they just say, okay, whoever, I don't care, but report on me, and that's it. I mean, they don't understand the wealth, the gold mine that they can do for SMEs for their own benefits. So. It's a lot of capacity building on education. So, but we have them clustered. We have them 100 at a time. So you can give one speech and you reach 100 mayors. So let's try to do something on this.
Yeah, because for me, the future of policy, public policy, right now, the open API contract is the policy definition for the resource. So say air quality. Here's the API endpoint. Here's the schema for that. Here's how we version that and move that forward. The API management service composition is the access policy. We're making this data available to these actors, and here's the different service composition of those arrangements. We have a special arrangement with IBM because they put in all the sensors. Here's the researcher or the universities, they have this access, and then here's the public access. And then the OAuth policy is the exchange of what data each of those actors can actually get and access as part of those requests. So open API management, and OAuth kind of provide that scaffolding for the technical details.
Do you think that if this is explained in a way that you can monetize this data and that will pay for the setup infrastructure in the long run, if we put that conversation in a monetary way, I think the ears will open more than just, because otherwise it's the the geeks in the IT department of mayor's office, but we
Amen.
need to elevate the story to a political level discussion.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do with the 311 data. So I want to have an end-to-end example of this for 311 data. And New York, so we just ingested the 10 years of New York City. I think we did Chicago, Baltimore. So each city API, put up an API management in front of it. Hey, if you just want to, it's free to access, anyone can access. But if you're Google, here's the management tier. And if you want to do that deep dive research into the past, show the researcher layer. And then show how we could generate revenue from this, and then show I would love to see an API management dashboard just for mayors. You know, if you could create a real-time visual dashboard that showed them not only what citizens and citizen activists are accessing data, what researchers, and then what commercial with a $ clicking, you know, and show them the revenue they could make from you know, the Googles and IBMs and others of the world. That would be huge. And I think if you could come up with the, you know, the one that would be, you know, the digital dashboard in the mayor's hall, you know, in the building, that would show some of this, that here's our public assets, you know, our transit data, our neighborhood data, our air quality, our environmental, our water, our food inspection, all being improved and evolved, but then also it's our citizens, our public data assets, and look, we're generating revenue by charging external actors from coming in and just mining it and extracting it. We're actually making money and making and then feeding it back in. And if you had that piece of the revenue of everything always going back to the community and back to the mayor's fund to make new things happen, that would be huge. So I'm going to try to come up with this around 311 data in the next 60 days as a working end-to-end example, all the way to like, hey, if all cities are on this API standard, here's an open source mobile app that you all can just download and use as part of your city and rebrand it. And you didn't have to pay for the development of that mobile app because it's using a common API standard. So and I need that end-to-end solution to be able to do that demo to mayors. But yeah, I'd love to have that in the next like 60, 90 days.
What you just mentioned is beyond mayor, it's national ministers and our commissioners on the EU, like the EU federal level, where we have learned the lesson that I learned actually a new expression. I was calling it the Hoovers, the big platforms being the Hoovers sucking European data, making money. Yeah, and now you call it the tractor beams. So I like that.
Well, it's the Death Star, you know, it's Star Wars.
So what you just explained on a local level, it's very much, it's like a fractal level. It can work on any administrative level. And that needs to be actually discussed on the highest political level, because that's what we want as European Commission. This is our #1 priority, my department. How do we make the data, industrial data, and personal and city data valuable for the local businesses?
Well, and how do you start seeing, I want to have enough of these stories to help you see that tractor beam. Like, I was so captivated by Google Maps when it came out. You know, it was like, there's no way I could have had access to this resource as a developer and build apps. I was like amazed. I was like, wow, this is so great. Of course, I'm gonna map my neighborhood. I'm gonna augment it with all these data points, and I'm gonna get our city transit doing it. I'm gonna get our mayor. Like, Google Maps is just amazing. And Google's like, yes, we've given you this resource, now build. And I didn't see the conveyor belt. You know, it's like a mining extraction, you know, conveyor belt. I didn't see it. And then once I saw it, you know, I literally kind of got vertigo where I'm like, I'm being used. Oh my God, I'm being used. You know, it's like you have that realization. And so how do you teach mayors to see that? And how do you teach people, you know, people in authority to see that they're being you know, and I want to keep using the mining, and because it's really, that's what it is. But they don't see it because they get this short-term political gain. You know, Google is very good at, and these enterprises, I got to stop saying Google because Google does some really good things. I'll say that. So these entities are very good at capitalizing on a short-term politician. I want to win right now for a big deal, a big announcement, and we won't see the downsides for 4 or 5 years of this extraction. Right now, it looks great. And so that political aspect of these open data and smart city movements is very devastating. But that mayor's gone by the time, you know, the downsides of that are felt. So we just got to we got to teach people how to see that they're being extracted from, and educate them enough so that they have the upper hand in it, and they can do that.
I think practically that's the last point. I don't want to dominate anymore. Practically is to actually build those APIs in the big pilots that we will fund. So in a way, one way to teach it is to make them experience it in a way, because kind of a room type teaching is one thing, and to get all the players that are building a smart city applications that we will fund heavily, is to actually build this knowledge into the projects that people apply with.
Yeah.
See,
it should be baked in by default.
Yeah.
So one thing I thought was interesting
in there, yeah.
I'll show you that I've forgotten is API umbrella, the API management layer that was built for all the government agencies. Look who built it. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory. So I think it speaks to the resource nature of all of this and the extractive, that they saw this needing. So they use this in their across all of their APIs, and then it spread to government wider. So I think this as a commodity needs to be baked into every project. It doesn't have to be API umbrella, but it just shows the nature of API management as being this critical fundamental commodity layer that needs to exist in all projects. So
wonderful. I think we have some of us could go on for another couple of hours. I think it's only right that I wrap this up. And really, Kin, I've had so many messages coming in, private ones, just saying, "Wow, that was awesome, mind blowing. We gotta take these ideas forward immediately." And that's exactly what I was hoping this would generate. So, thank you so much for spending the almost 2.5 hours with us. I look forward to a follow-up conversation once we get our sort of first order vision together. I'd love to do another one of these and really get some feedback on, poke holes in it, see what you think, and really see, just continue this conversation. And I hope the same thing could happen with the commission. It would be fantastic for me, the digital product passport is a fundamental concept going forward. And I'm trying to figure out, how does a European digital product passport mesh with global data, and what's our role in kind of that API ecosystem, right? And so I'm also thinking about those interconnections. But the product passport could be, transformative, not just for the European region, but obviously if the European region adopts it, it could become a de facto global standard. So the stakes are huge, really. And if we get the European right, then it could potentially have knock-on effects for the global level. So that's why I also find it a fascinating space. So thank you again on behalf of all of our colleagues. Let me share, once you've downloaded and put your thoughts together, I'm happy to be a dissemination point for your thoughts to all the colleagues who are on the call. And then I'm happy to set up another call in the new year with you to basically take it to another step. Yeah,
I'll work on the kind of bright spots I see across the government work I've done. And then the Twitter, I think the API management assessment, I'll share both of those. The 311 that I do in the next, I'll share that, because that's kind of pick one meaningful resource, wrap it in this API management vision that's happening, and demonstrate it end to end. But I would love to do that for any other resource that you guys think would be helpful down the road, whether it's the digital product passport or any specific environmental specific resource. I can pretty rapidly set up an end-to-end demo, show how create an API, create the open API, the standards, and show it end-to-end pretty quick. So if you guys have a resource, let me know. And then, let's keep talking. This is good stuff. I love it. Thank you again. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Cheers.